latter half of the 80s that I attended a camp meeting, the Gladstone, Oregon Conference camp meeting, and I was, like all the other hundreds of people there in the audience, listening to the various speakers, and all of a sudden I became curious about the present speaker. His name was Delmer Wagner. He was from Southern Oregon, and he was developing a newly authorized system by the Federal Communications Commission for television in small communities, known back then and still is low-power television. And he was urging the audience, representatives from all over the Oregon Conference, to take this seriously and develop local TV stations. This intrigued me. Having been in radio for years, I didn't know what that would entail. Delmer Wagner challenged me, and something came into my heart that I had to pursue this. Delmer Wagner wanted Walla Walla College to be a source of programming. He recognized that Three Angels Broadcasting had a source of programming for low-power television stations to use, but he wanted it enriched by what Walla Walla College could produce. And so that's what I did. When I came back here, I communicated to Walla Walla College at that time. There were layoffs happening. It was not a good time for Walla Walla College to assume, perhaps even in their minds, a liability for another organization. And I also was saying I was determined to pull this off, but I said, I'm going to go to the village church and see whether the village church would be interested. I had already, of course, was a fellow pastor with Bud Roberts, and I spoke to him about the project that I had in mind, and he ran with it.
Well, back in the very beginning, I got a letter from Bud Roberts at the village church addressed to three of us. And we met with Roger Johnson and Jim Rowe. We had a period of time of prayer. We decided to answer the questions that the board was asking. Should we apply for licenses for the FCC? When should we apply? How much power should we ask for? And we met, and briefly we realized, we need divine help in this task. So we decided we would meet again in 2 weeks, the five of us. In the meantime, we would study the scripture, study spirit of prophecy, study whatever was God's revealed will to us, to see how he would speak to us, answer the question. Interestingly, when we got back together in 2 weeks, we all had the same exact response. We had studied, we'd prayed privately, individually, without talking to each other. We all had the same response. Yes, move forward, apply to the FCC. And we did. So we were on our way. The FCC granted the three applications we wanted the most for a construction permit, and we started raising funds, which came in very quickly.
For several years, I had been interacting with some consulting engineers in Wenatchee. I had asked in the Northwest who would have the best chance of getting applications through the Federal Communications Commission. And the name George Fries of East Wenatchee kept coming to the surface. So I made contact with George, and he was able to find some frequencies that would be applicable for Blue Mountain Television. When we first went to George Fries and asked him to find a channel for Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association that would be workable, they told me the bad news that there was no channel left in this part of eastern Washington that would handle 1,000 watts. By reducing our power from 1,000 watts down to 100 watts, we could have a channel on Pikes Peak, but we had to settle for smaller stations closer to College Place and Walla Walla. And that's why, because of that restriction, we chose 2 other stations to coordinate and have the intensity of the signal located in the local communities of Walla Walla and College Place. As I mentioned, the sites of these 3 transmitters were strategic. First of all, we had chosen the site on Pikes Peak due to the opportunity that Dave Bullock and I had to put KGTS's transmitter up on Pikes Peak. We already had an existing lease, and we chose to add Channel 21 for that site. And then the other channels, where would we put those? Well, we wanted a station that would be very intense for College Place. And so the village church roof, at the peak of the roof, was that channel, at Channel 45. And then there was a tower that I had scanned. As I said, those of us in communication, we're always curious about looking at antennas and getting the signal out and towers. And so I saw this tower on Electric Avenue. Interesting location, Electric Avenue. And it was a translator tower for Channel 2's station up in Spokane. When I made contact with the owner of the tower and the owner of the land that the tower would sit on, it ended up being a fortuitous site because they were in the process of wanting to take down that translator. And when they found out that we would be interested in using the tower with them, they said, well, this would be a good time to let you have us, meaning Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association, have full rights for the tower since we don't have to take the tower down. I can still feel the experience and the shock of hearing that he said, would it be all right if we sold you the tower and give you the legal rights for the tower and the antennas and the building for $1? That's how interested they were in passing on these aspects of this site on Electric Avenue to Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association. So it became a strategic location for Blue Mountain Television, and in fact, which it is today. Getting the Electric Avenue site, the 145-foot tower, for $1, certainly from our vantage point, seemed to be a providential experience for us. It was a great encouragement that there was the location for our 3rd site for Blue Mountain Television. The transmitter was turned on with Bruce Smith and I in the attic, so to speak, of the Village Seventh Adventist Church, where the organ speakers were located. And Friday afternoon at 2:07, April 20, is when we saw the first images come off of our antenna on a little portable black and white television. That Friday afternoon, after Blue Mountain Television went on the air, I took my portable black and white battery-operated television receiver, my handheld device, which of course back then was quite something to even have, and then I took it to Elder Bill Bieber in Country Estates. And I said, Bill, let's attach your television to Channel 45 by using this antenna. And so by attaching the antenna correctly and programming his television, he was able to receive Channel 45 in the Valley. And I believe he was the first one. We had several other reports for those that were only on antenna. They were able to receive it from various parts in the Valley. So it was quite sensational that first weekend to have Three Angels Broadcasting available through Channel 45 on top of the Village Seventh Adventist Church, and getting reports from all around about how effective it was already. We were encouraged. as soon as we were able to get on the air and we were thrilled with seeing the General Conference session, Bud Roberts said we must have an employee. He was a visionary, and he was aware about these internships that the General Conference and North America had. And he was the one that said, we've got to find out who we should hire to be an intern, a communication intern for our new TV station. And that's when we interviewed, Bud and I interviewed Linnell, back then, Linnell Childs, and she was chosen to be the first intern of our new TV station.
I began working at Blue Mountain Television right after college. I heard about the job while I was still a student at Walla Walla College. My professor, Jim Hannum, who was part of the board, I understand, even at that early time for Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association, told me that there was a possibility of a job as an intern station manager at a little TV station that was just starting in Walla Walla. And so that's how I interviewed and got the job. And interesting thing was that it did start as a General Conference communication internship, and it was a 2-year internship. So it's kind of unusual probably to have a station manager as an intern. And the hard thing about that internship was that I didn't really have the same kind of mentorship that you might hope for in an internship. But it was a great opportunity for me spiritually, because when you realize what you don't know and you're really young and you're completely overwhelmed, it's just all turning to God and asking Him for help. And so it was a really, really good growth experience for me spiritually, and the people on the board were very supportive and very helpful, and they were like team members, you know, in what we were doing.
And we really didn't have much to offer her. It was all programmed by Three Angels Broadcasting.
And we did a few things that were shorter, where we kind of recorded ourselves and then put them on the air, talking about what was happening at the station and that sort of thing. But the first show that we did was called Skyhook, and it was an addiction recovery show. And it was actually live, and we took calls during the show, so we were really ambitious.
Many people didn't know how to connect to Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association and receive 3ABN, because they didn't know how to attach and convert their television to go back and forth between antenna and cable. And so it became very much needed, in the sense that Blue Mountain Television would be represented on cable. There was a recent Federal Communications Commission regulation saying, and this was actually voted by the Congress of the United States, saying that low power television stations that were serving a certain size and region of their communities could access cable through legislation called Must Carry. Don Eckes, who was an engineer in Channel 19, he called me and said, "Roger, I think that you would qualify for Must Carry." And so we explored that, and we felt like we were close enough to fulfilling those requirements, which were quite specific, that we needed to have a consulting engineer to lead us through that appeal. And so we hired a professional engineer. His name is Don Martin. And through Don Martin's skills, he was able to lead us legally, and he wrote a letter to our local cable system indicating that we had indeed the rights for a must carry. And that's when we were able to get on, for the first time, our cable system. One of the requirements that you would have to meet was a certain amount of local programming. And this is back in 1992. We came on the air in 1990, and we had just barely achieved being able to put tapes from our local studio onto the air. That was big for us. But now we had to fulfill local programming requirements. I think there was 4 hours a week that we would have to validate before we would be given must carry. And it just so happened in the Lord's providence that Julie Sanders Keemer had this inspiration that she wanted to do a news broadcast as a senior project at Walla Walla College for her communication major.
God gives ideas, and He gave us the idea of having a news show on Blue Mountain Television. We started Valley News, and it ended up being my senior project when I was a senior at Walla Walla College at the time, and working with Linnell Childs Ellis and coming up with this idea of having local news for Walla Walla Valley and having the students at the college and the communications department involved with that. So it was a fantastic opportunity. The news went about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we would do a commercial, a little bumper, and then Valley Viewpoint would follow to round out the 30 minutes. And to be able to do that as my senior project, to work with Linnell and Blue Mountain Television and Kevin Kruger up at KGTS, because that's where we would use the Associated Newswire to get the news stories, and working with my friend Jolynn Fisher, she and I were the anchors that year of Valley News. Welcome to Valley News for Thursday, November 5. I'm Julie Sanders.
And I'm Jolynn Fisher. Thank you for joining us.
Back in the day, this is how we did it. We went up to the Associated Press Newswire at KGTS, and we printed off all the news for the day, and we would cut it out, and we would go from the top story on down, and we'd actually tape it to a piece of paper, because these were the days before teleprompters. And so we'd go to the college copy center, copy off the script, and go flying in just in time to go live. And God blessed all the time. We didn't have teleprompters, so we had to read the script like this. And the flurry of students and activity in the old ad building where we would do Valley News, it just was such a joy, and the camaraderie of everybody coming together. We had great stories to tell, and we had great support with Jim Hannum, Nancy Sematook, and Linnell, and others. And to have fellow students be able to work together on this program, it was such a joy and a great learning opportunity. And then to have God take Valley News and Valley Viewpoint as local TV programming, and enabled us then to go onto cable, and that way more people could hear the good news of all of the broadcasts that are done on Blue Mountain Television.
What I really was so blessed in knowing is that Julie had this inspiration to do the news, and that was about maybe 10 to 12 minutes or so. And so therefore we needed to have more time to fill the rest of the half hour. And that's when, between Linnell and several of us, we got a team of volunteers, and we started to do Valley Viewpoints to fill in the rest of the half hour after the news. But the strategic timing of when we needed to have the programming to fulfill a must-carry requirement in the fall of '92, which we were able to achieve. In the spring of that year, Julie already had this inspiration to do news. I sensed that that was just a providential timing. And then, of course, Linnell and I, as well as other volunteers in years past, have joined in doing hosting for Valley Viewpoint.
So as a student and early in my career in communications, I feel so blessed that I had that opportunity, and then as years progressed to see the other students who have gotten involved with Blue Mountain Television. I just want to say thank you to the Lord and Blue Mountain Television and Linnell and everybody else for giving me that opportunity, because the Lord has blessed me incredibly being associated with Blue Mountain Television, and I just hope and pray that we have been a blessing to others.
One of the dreams that I had from when I started working at Blue Mountain Television was to do a cooking show at some point. And it took a while for this to happen. I'd actually been working at the station for about 7 years before we did this show, but we called it Culinary Delights, and we did vegan cooking, but we tried to make it really interesting, kind of gourmet, the kind of food that anyone would enjoy whether they felt like eating vegan or not. And my sister loves to cook, and so we did this show together, Denise Childs and me, and it was a lot of fun. We did it at the old ad building where we had a little studio at Walla Walla University. It was Walla Walla College then, and it was, Jim Forsyth built us a little table with an old stovetop in it that served as our counter, and it was very simple, just some basic, what we call flats in the background it was a really simple set, and we just took a mirror and hung it above what we were doing and then aimed a camera up at the mirror so that people could see what we were cooking. Everything was flipped in a mirror image, so it wasn't exactly like you're supposed to do it in television, but it worked. One of the shows that Blue Mountain Television is probably kind of known for is Escape, which was an outdoor adventure reality show, and I know that I'm really proud of it as something that happened during the time that I was working at the station as station manager, and I was executive producer of that show, and it was fun. The idea came actually from Nakia Furman, who was our production manager at that time, and he just came to me one day and said, "I've got this idea."
Probably the project that I enjoyed most working on at Blue Mountain Television was Escape. And I remember coming to Linnell with the idea for kind of an outdoor show because it was, I think the outdoors kind of strips away all the constructs and kind of things that get in the way of a story a lot of times. And then as Linnell and I talked about it, and we'd been talking for some time about some sort of a show that could get people out of the studio, how we just have all these talking head shows, but what is something that's going to compel people but be affordable to produce? And so Linnell and I talked a bunch about that, and then we talked about it with the interns and staff and board members and people in the community, and it all came together. It was such a privilege to work on.
And interestingly, reality television was very new. We're talking 2001, and shows like Survivor were new, and there wasn't anything being done in the Christian world that was reality show based, not in this sense. So he pitched the idea to me and said, we're going to tell people spiritual stories while they're on an adventure, and those two stories are going to kind of get woven together. So he said it'll be a great way to reach people who don't watch religious television. They don't watch that stuff. They don't want to be preached at. What could we do that would just be exciting and interesting, but that would also tell them something about God and people's relationship with God? So I went along on probably 7 or 8 out of the 13 episodes that we were doing for Escape. We were doing things like climbing Mount Rainier, where we would have to put our batteries in our sleeping bag with us at night and sleep with them, because if you didn't, they weren't going to work the next day, and carrying everything with you up the mountain. And we were going down in sunken missile silos, where diving was happening.
My first week at Blue Mountain Television was on an Escape episode. We went to the Powell River up in Canada, Nakia and I. It was just the two of us on crew up there paddling around these lakes. It was a great experience for me the first week on the job to be working on an Escape episode. What I always found interesting is if you look at the episode that we shot, all of the things that the people were doing, we were doing on the crew afterwards. So when they were portaging their canoe to the next lake, we had to do that with all of our gear after. So they were sitting there waiting for us to get all of our gear moved as well.
So just a lot of adventures that were outside of sort of my normal life that were really, really fun. And I want to say it wasn't just about the fact that we were on an adventure like that, it was that we were on an adventure to tell these people's stories. And how important it was to us to actually tell those stories. We got stopped at the border trying to go into Canada to tell one of the stories, and it was miraculous that we got in. And we were just praying in a little huddle at the border crossing, will they let us in to tell this story, because it was so important to us to do. It was really neat to do that show, and not just because people noticed it and liked it. That's important though, because if people notice it and like it, then it means you can actually communicate the message that you're trying to share. So that was exciting for us, because we were trying to reach a different audience, an audience that doesn't like necessarily to hear a preacher, but still has spiritual needs and needs to hear about people's experiences with God and know that it's real in our sort of postmodern world that we're living in. So that was a lot of fun.
And I just really think that there's such potential for really creative programming that will reach people more effectively. I think we just get, like I've said before, caught up in sermons, and it's cheap to produce, it's quick to produce, it's familiar, but it totally misses so many people. They'll never be reached. The gospel will never reach those people because they're just not open to that format. And there are a broad variety of types of shows that need to be made so that they can reach a broad variety of people with their interests and specific needs.
Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association has always had affiliation with one network or another. And we started with Three Angels Broadcasting Network, which was really the only network that was associated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church that existed at the time. We started in 1990. And we worked with them for a number of years. There were some challenges, especially in the fact that Three Angels Broadcasting Network didn't want stations to do too much local programming. And that was challenging for us here in our valley, because we actually had the resources and the desire and people who were interested in doing local things. So there was some tension there over that, kind of historically. And when we learned about what at the time was the New Hope Channel, and I remember going to meetings about this in spring of 2004, Jim Forsyth and I went to those meetings. He was the secretary of the board, and we went to hear what they were planning for this Hope Channel, which was going to be officially sponsored by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we got very excited about what they had in mind and what they were going to do and what they wanted to do. And so we came back and told the board about the plans, and the decision was made that it was probably a good idea for Blue Mountain Television to move over to be a Hope Channel affiliate, especially since that was going to be an official network of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so we did that, went in, I think, the next fall, when we had opportunity to transition over. It was challenging because we lost some programs that people really, really loved and felt attached to. And Hope Channel was a little bit rough in the beginning until they kind of got their wheels turning smoothly with what they were doing. So it got better and better as we went along, but it did make for one kind of bumpy financial year for Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association, where people were missing some of their old programs and they weren't used to the new things yet, and Hope Channel was kind of getting up to speed as well. But overall, I think, and long term, it's been a really good affiliation and a good thing for Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association. In the mid-2000s, there was a new development happening here in our valley with the churches, and that was a facility called Sunbridge, which was going to be a really community-focused place, and it's here and thriving now with, thrift store and dental services and all those kinds of things, and lots of services to the community. And when this building and this concept was first being developed, Blue Mountain Television was at a place where we had totally outgrown the upper room, the little room at the village church. In fact, our editor Nakia Furman was editing in a closet, literally.
When I first started working at Blue Mountain Television, we were still in the upper room at the Village Church. I remember there that summer as an intern, we had Brian Bell, Chris Kelly, and myself all in this one tiny corner, just bumping elbows constantly.
We knew that we needed to move to somewhere larger, and we wondered if perhaps we could be a part of what would happen at Sunbridge. And so I was still at the station when we made those initial plans, and where we sort of drafted the plans and drew up what our little portion of that Sunbridge building would look like and the renovations that Blue Mountain Television would need to do.
Plans were in place to move to the new Sunbridge Community Center, and there we would have much more elbow room. We did lots of fundraising, we did lots of remodeling. Jim Rowe set a whole bunch of stuff up there. We had a new automation system when we moved over there. Finally, November of 2009, we moved into that new facility, and it was great to have all of that extra elbow room. Several years ago, one Sabbath, I was home sick. And so my wife and I watched New Perceptions that morning as our church service. And the message that Dwight Nelson presented really touched our hearts. My wife and I were talking after it was over, and we designed a program called Daily Bread. My idea was to bring in different pastors from the valley, since we have 12 churches here in the area, and have them present a devotional. The idea goes back to when I was at Andrews. One of my friends did a video talking about the importance of Bible study. So many people that are into maybe watching TV or movies or doing all these other things and neglecting that time with God. And so this program was designed to help people have a deeper connection with God. This was early December, and so we hurried to have this new program on Blue Mountain Television by the 1st of January. I came to Kim, the current station manager, said, I have an idea for a program. And I pitched the whole idea of what it would be about, and he said, go for it. And so we went for it. And since the program was called Daily Bread, I really wanted to be a daily program. And so we were really ambitious those early days of Daily Bread. We had 5 new episodes a week for several months as we were really trying to have something new and fresh. And eventually we scaled back the number of episodes. The first year there was over 150 episodes that we shot. Initially I was wondering who should host the program. I wasn't certain that I wanted to do it, but there was a professor at Andrews. I took several classes from her, and each class that I was in, each student had to do a devotional for that class. Each student was given a day, and we had to prepare a devotional for that given day. And so I presented a devotional in each one of those classes, and each time afterwards, my professor says, you need to be a pastor. You need to be a pastor. And so that's always stuck in my mind. And I think that played a part in designing Daily Bread, in doing those devotionals for people each and every day. Each time I do a Daily Bread, I'm reminded of her comment that you really need to be a pastor. And so as I think about it, I'm in media. This is a great way for me to be able to share the message of God through a different medium than what a normal pastor would do. I talk to numerous people of how they've been blessed by listening to Daily Bread each and every day. And it is a privilege and a blessing to bring this program to people each and every day.
Once I was on board, I really prayed and thought a lot about, what can I do? What can I produce that might be a benefit to the viewers and to Blue Mountain Television, and that, would just glorify the Lord. And I was looking at Steps to Christ, the little book by Ellen White. It has 13 chapters, and I needed 13 episodes. And so in each chapter of Steps to Christ seemed to be the right length for me to do a production using that as the script. And so what happens is that we had a narrator narrating every line of Steps to Christ, in every chapter. And meanwhile, in every chapter, we'd have somebody hiking into the wilderness, trying to find a quiet place to read their Bible.
I remember Daniel coming to me with the idea for a quiet place, and I told him to go for it, and he ran with it, and it was a great series on Blue Mountain Television.
When I was filming A Quiet Place, what we would do is pick some incredibly beautiful locations where we could go and film someone hiking. So we're really looking for special locations where I could film somebody hiking along. For example, Lowell and I went down to Palouse Falls, and so I photographed him along the trail and getting down, and finally the goal is for that hiker to find a quiet place to sit and read their Bible out in nature.
I remember having the privilege of going on one of the episodes of A Quiet Place. And on this specific episode, I was the person seeking a quiet place. And so we went to the Palouse Falls area, and I hiked all the way down to the bottom of the falls there and had Bible study right down there at the bottom of the falls. It was a great time, but it was a very, very warm summer day that we went and shot that episode. And so by the time we got to the end, we were very tired and dehydrated.
But on that particular trip, it was extremely hot that day, and I had gone through my big bottle of water, and again, I'm packing quite a bit of gear, and I'm running around trying to film him from the front, and from the behind, and from the front, and then we had to scale down a hill that was very steep. As a matter of fact, there are ropes there to hold on to. In the hot, climbing down there with the gear, going down to Palouse Falls and setting up, it was a challenge. We got some beautiful shots that day. I think we really had some really great scenes. But on the way back up, it was just still hot. We made our way back up to the parking lot, but by this time, I was incredibly thirsty.
I had a camel pack on with a lot of water, but by the time we got to the bottom of the falls, I had drained that and there was no water left. And so hiking out of that area was a little bit of a challenge, and we were severely dehydrated by the time we got back to the car.
It's a joy to be out and doing these productions, but there are some challenges, and so it's good, but mixed with hard work. It really is a lot of hard work.
Well, the whole idea of Secret Life of the Forest came when Elder Roger Johnson asked Dan and I to do a walk through the natural area, which is part of Fort Walla Walla park system.
I was on a valley viewpoint with Roger Johnson and Mike Denny. Mike Denny was our guest, and we were out in the Audubon Trail near Fort Walla Walla, and Mike was explaining all the ministries of each plant and animal. He was showing how all the plants and animals are reliant on one another, and it was just such an amazing experience. And so we began to talk, and Mike and I agreed to take on an ambitious project without any funding or equipment to film Secret Life of the Forest, the northern Blue Mountains.
I remember Daniel coming to me with the idea for Secret Life of the Forest. We had seen the episode that he and Mike and Roger had done on the Fort Walla Walla natural area, and it was such a good program, and the idea for Secret Life of the Forest was presented. Mike was willing, Daniel was willing, so off they went, filming that series. It took 14 months.
So we spent about 14 months filming in the northern Blue Mountains with a goal to teach and benefit the community. It was exciting to work with Mike because, he has over 40 years of studying the soils, the plants, and animals in our area.
Over the years, I worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a field biologist, and so I had been all over the northern Blue Mountains. And then I also worked for the State Conservation Commission. And in doing that, occasionally I'd get up on the forest edge. But I already knew the roads, so that wasn't a big issue. But I knew where certain plants and certain animals were at certain times of the year. And so that made it a lot easier than just fumbling around out there in the dark, hoping we would see something. We had many partners that were extremely supportive, and we were able to get all kinds of images from the northern Blue Mountains. And we only covered from the I-84 corridor north to Pomeroy, Washington. So that's just strictly the very northern tip of the Blue Mountains. But it was an incredible experience, and the reason we did it, and the reason I was very interested in it, is I saw it as an educational opportunity, and I also saw it as a very important part of our lives here, and that is stewardship and conservation. Because the natural world is the second book, and we as Christians are supposed to be very aware of what's going on out there and very supportive and careful in protecting those areas. And so this was just a great, great opportunity provided to do that. The amazing thing is that the outpouring from the community was amazing. When we had our premiere at Whitman College, we had 600 people show up to see that.
Secret Life of the Forest, the Northern Blue Mountains, was well received, and many people tuned in. I believe that many people started watching Blue Mountain Television to watch that program, and we got several new viewers. As a matter of fact, there was a certain professor in town who made a comment that once he started watching our programming, he didn't realize that we had a health message, and he really was interested in that health message. This program sold many DVDs and actually won a Bronze Telly Award. Now turned to the community for more support and received funding for our Secret Life of the Desert program, Secret Life of the Desert, the Deserts of the Pacific Northwest.
Well, the Secret Life of the Deserts of the Pacific Northwest is a much larger, more ambitious project because it covers the Pacific Northwest. Whereas the Northern Blue Mountain one just covered the Northern Blues, which were 2 counties, 3 counties in Oregon and 4 in Washington. But the Secret Life of the Deserts of the Pacific Northwest, no one has ever done one on the deserts in the Northwest. And it presents an opportunity, an educational opportunity, and it also, again, shows the agreements and the dependencies and how nature functions, and that everything out there is connected. There's not a single organism in the natural world that's an island unto itself, and neither are we. And so when we educate ourselves about the natural world, and that's what this program is about, is looking at what on earth has been created out there. It's just beautiful. And so we want to share that. And our desert areas in the Northwest actually cover the largest percentage of the landmass of the Pacific Northwest. And so it's absolutely imperative that people understand what is out there and that it's not a wasteland and something to be destroyed or demolished. And that's what people tend to think about deserts is, you know, let's blow it up or overgraze it or whatever. But there's tons of life out there. And so this is a beautiful opportunity to share not only the Christian message, but also the message that all life is dependent out there as well. So.
A day in the life of filming Secret Life of the Deserts of the Pacific Northwest. First, it's usually an early car ride out of town and then heading to a destination, and typically we have a couple species loosely planned that we think that will either be present or in bloom or something, some spectacular thing that timing is required where we're going to go try to find that. But along the way, inevitably, the art of observation, we are seeing wonderful, beautiful things along the way, and we've been blessed by so many random, amazing things. Often, we're photographing things that we didn't think we would see, and those turn out to be quite the gem. We started last summer in some of the filming, and it's so hot outside, and I carry a big backpack, and sometimes, there was a couple times where I got a little close to dehydrated and wasn't drinking quite enough water. And if you put a thermometer on the surface of the ground, it can range from 120 to 130 degrees. And I spent a lot of time crawling on my belly, chasing insects and photographing flowers and things like that. So it was, it can be demanding and challenging and hot, but you know, it's a joy to be out there with Mike Denny, and I just love learning about all the relationships between all the different plants and animals, and truly we live on a planet that is relationship based, and I believe that God is relationship based as well.
The desire for a long time has been to have our studio and our offices all in one location. And so we found a property out on Wallula Avenue, and we have purchased this property, and we are currently in the process of moving to this new facility. We're still doing some fundraising. We're planning on doing a whole bunch of remodeling, much like we did with the Sunbridge location. And we hope to very soon to be able to move into this new facility.
I see God leading Blue Mountain Television in a couple different ways, and one of the ways that I see God leading is that we found a brand new studio. And this studio is something that we've been looking for a long, long time. And when we saw this building for sale, we just got so excited about it and just immediately clicked. It just seemed like it was a perfect fit. And sure enough, we were able to get an incredible deal on that, on the studio that we're actually standing in right now. And so I saw God leading in that.
Where I see Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association going in the future is a couple of directions, actually, that I think are really exciting. And one is the new facility that we have on Wallula, and the fact that we're going to be able to have our own studio space. We're going to have a place for everybody to work in a creative environment where they can have the room to do that. And so I really see Blue Mountain Broadcasting Association and Blue Mountain Television growing in that way with a new facility. But beyond that, what I'm really mostly excited about is what will happen with programming that will really reach and speak to current people, current generation people. So there's kind of a whole nother side of it that has to do much more with what we call content creation. And I kind of see it being the station, but also this content creation piece that is going to create things that will be for the television station, but they're also going to be for live streaming. They're going to be for people's mobile devices. We're going to use every current technology that we can access to reach people in lots of different formats, and we want to get more and more creative people working here in that environment to do things that are amazing for God's kingdom. Volunteers are the key to Blue Mountain Television and have been from the very beginning. It just wouldn't even be a station without the amazing volunteers that have been a part of it over the years. And I can remember and think back on so many amazing and precious people who have given hours and hours to the television station.
Volunteers have been such a huge part of Blue Mountain Television. We couldn't do what we do without volunteers, and so we are eternally grateful for all of the volunteers that have volunteered their time, their money, their talents to Blue Mountain Television over the years, because without our volunteers, we certainly would not be where we are at today.
We've also had such fantastic volunteers who have been involved throughout the years at Blue Mountain Television. And with 30 years, some of our dear volunteers have gone to their rest, but they haven't been forgotten. And we just want to say thank you to all of you who have been involved with Blue Mountain Television, who continue to be involved. The ladies who came and brought us food at Share-a-thon, many of you might remember our Share-a-thon was up in the attic in the little top of Village Church where the studio is up there, and I remember days of hosting with Dan Matthews and Linnell Childs Ellis, and we were up there and the flow of people coming. Also, we want to thank you for your donations and your support of Blue Mountain Television, because again, it's prayer, working together, and the Lord's blessing financially that Blue Mountain Television can continue to be on the air and to move to its new studios. I will never forget a share-a-thon where a little child came in with a handful of coins, put them on the counter, and that's what the child had to give. And it was so moving to see, because that child had saved and they wanted to give to the Lord, to Blue Mountain Television.
So why do we exist? We exist to point people to the God who created them and loves them and wants to save them. So that's really the whole purpose of it. And at the beginning, we had some really interesting and thrilling experiences. When we first went on the air then in April of 1990, that was just the month before Mother's Day. And at that time, we had decided, we want to be able to record this and put it on the air. So the very first broadcast was 1 week later from Mother's Day in 1990. And Bud Roberts, the pastor there, he was the chairman of the board at that time too. He preached a wonderful sermon on family. And there was a local gentleman in his home who was kind of flipping through the channels, and he came across this and he started listening. And pretty soon he called his wife, "Hey, listen to this. This is about the family and what God intended families to be like. This seems like it's good stuff." And they listened. After it was over with, after a few days, they called up the village church and said, "We saw that broadcast. By the way, we couldn't do it live back then. It was on an old VHS, just a little consumer-grade camera that was mounted up on the balcony, a single shot, just primitive." But the lesson was that the Holy Spirit, using that primitive broadcast, reached out to a family in need. They called up and asked if they could attend church. They came, they were welcomed, they began studying God's Word, and they chose to be baptized. And that was the reason why we existed, not just to make church members, but to connect people with God.
I have really seen God working at Blue Mountain Television and in my own life connected with it. I don't know how to separate those things because it's all just a spiritual experience for me. From the very first day that I arrived there and was completely overwhelmed by what I had been asked to do, all the way through the journey of various programs that we produced, the people that I met, the donors who gave, all of it has been God working.
When I contemplate how God has led through these years, through the various talented volunteers, the connections, the timing, the generosity, the literally millions of dollars that have been contributed to Blue Mountain Television to sustain the staff, to sustain the incredible amount of upgrading of equipment, that it certainly has been an inspiration to see how God has moved the hearts of many, many viewers in this valley. And it has given me confidence to know that through the television, God's Spirit impresses hearts. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many that have given so generously to sustain this television ministry through these 30 years.
I'm really excited about the power that there is in Jesus Christ, in that story of hope for today and salvation for tomorrow. And I think it's so important for people to hear that message. I think that a lot of Christian media fails to meet the need that's really there. I see that a lot of sermons being preached, and sermons reach a certain demographic, and they're an important thing, but there's a whole different world out there, a whole different demographic, or many different demographics of age groups and types of people that will never meet Jesus through a sermon. They'll only meet it through stories about Jesus or people who've been impacted by Jesus. And it makes me just incredibly sad, actually, when I see a lot of television stations miss the mark in that regard. And I just really pray and hope that Blue Mountain Television continues to seek opportunities to meet people where they're at. And I think it's been great the ways that Blue Mountain Television has already done that with some past programs and current programs. And I just think it's so important to continue that.
We see and hear about changed lives and programming that is wholesome and appreciated. We see God leading our future with a new studio and the opportunity for growth and better programming. The station is important because there are only a few SDA resources, and the truth be told, we are a little flock. And we need all hands on deck to reach people where they are, and most people are in front of a screen. This pandemic has shown that we are of value to the community and are what people turn to when things get bad, and we need to be there for them. And Blue Mountain Television will grow in importance, and we need your support to grow and to reach more people.
Blue Mountain Television has been a blessing to the Walla Walla Valley for 30 years. The idea behind Blue Mountain Television has been to reach souls for Jesus Christ. We want to bring people into the kingdom. And as we hear stories of people's lives that have been changed through Blue Mountain Television, the baptisms that take place at Village Church and other churches as a result of Blue Mountain Television programming warms my heart. And that's why we're here, to share the love of Christ with those in our valley.
So we need to have confidence in looking at history to see how God has led, how He is leading now, and have confidence that He will lead in the future. That's why I'm involved in Blue Mountain Television. Right back from day one, it excited me to think this can make a difference in people's lives, to know personally a loving God and know Jesus Christ and what He did, His sacrifice in His living and dying and resurrection and what He's doing now. And there are people on Blue Mountain Television broadcasts who are sharing that story in a very professional way and leading people to Christ, and that's what excites me. I'd just like to help them be able to do that if I can.
The spirit and the heart of the people who believe in Blue Mountain Television in our community, what they have done, what they're currently doing, is truly inspiring. It's amazing. And I think God has honored that. God honors that. He works with it. And He has done and is doing and will do more really amazing things through this ministry.